The moment Gregory Langston stepped into the cafe, the air shifted. Conversations hushed, movements stiffened, and even the espresso machine seemed to quiet in his presence. Gregory wasn't just another wealthy customer, he was a legend wrapped in fear. A millionaire tech mogul known not for his brilliance, but for his volcanic temper and crushing arrogance. He treated the staff not as people but as servants unworthy of mistakes. Each morning, he demanded a double espresso with a hint of cinnamon perfectly balanced, or else. A single misstep could lead to humiliation, screaming fits, or worse, termination on the spot. His power was suffocating. People had seen him slam cups onto the floor, berate managers publicly, and walk out leaving broken spirits behind him. That day, the tension was no different. Gregory took his usual seat by the window, overseeing the cafe like a king surveying his court. The young barista, Noah, trembled as he placed the cup before him. But Gregory's piercing blue eyes froze on the espresso, and within seconds, his fury ignited. The porcelain clink echoed like a warning bell. What followed was an all-too-familiar storm. But what no one expected was that this time, someone would stand up. A young black waitress named Maya Carter, only a week into her job, would break the unspoken rule. Never challenge Gregory Langston. What she did next would not only shake the caf, but begin to shatter the hardened heart of the city's most feared man. The clatter of porcelain on marble echoed through the caf like a gunshot. Gregory Langston, tech tycoon, multimillionaire, and self-declared perfectionist, had just slammed his espresso cup on the table in disgust. The young barista who had made it, Noah Bennett, flinched so hard he nearly dropped the milk jug he was holding. Everyone in the cafe froze. Eyes darted away. Breaths were held. It was happening again. For years, Gregory Langston had made this cafe his personal battleground. He demanded silence, perfection, and complete control. No one dared to speak to him unless spoken to. No one dared to challenge his twisted notion of excellence. Even the manager, Mr. Thomas Reed, had been publicly humiliated by Langston more times than he could count. But he never spoke back, because to challenge Gregory was to risk everything. His reach extended far beyond the cafe's polished floors. That morning, however, something shifted. Among the servers was a new hire, Maya Carter, a 20-year-old black woman with deep brown eyes and a quiet strength that came from years of watching her mother face injustice with dignity. Maya had grown up in the south side of Chicago, raised by Patricia Carter, a woman who worked 3 jobs to keep her daughter in school. Her mother's words echoed in her heart every time Maya faced difficulty. No matter how rich or powerful they are, you look them in the eye, and you stand your ground. Never let anyone steal your dignity. So when she saw Noah trembling in the aftermath of Gregory's outburst, saw the tears welling in his eyes and the shame curving his back, Maya knew what she had to do, even if every fiber of her body screamed at her to stay quiet. She set down her tray of cappuccinos, took a deep breath, and walked straight toward Gregory's table. Gasps filled the cafe. Mr. Reed's face went pale. Another server tried to grab Maya's arm, whispering, "Don't do it," but she gently pulled away. Her steps were firm. Her voice was steady. "Mr. Langston," she said, standing tall, "you have no right to treat people this way." Gregory looked up slowly, blinking in disbelief. For a second, he didn't speak, because no one ever dared address him like that. "Excuse me," he said, his voice low, dangerous. "You heard me," Maya replied. "You may have money and power, but that doesn't give you the right to humiliate people. Noah is doing his best. We all are. You don't get to belittle human beings just because you don't like your coffee." Silence fell like a curtain. Gregory's cold blue eyes narrowed. His face turned red, not just with anger, but confusion. This had never happened before. "You must not know who I am," he growled. "I could ruin this place with a phone call. I could ruin you." Maya didn't flinch. "I do know who you are," she said calmly. "But I also know who I am. And my self-respect isn't for sale. Not even to someone like you." A beat passed. Then another. Gregory stood, looming over her. But Maya held her ground, her eyes unwavering. It was the first time in years anyone had looked at him without fear. And then, something even more unexpected happened. From the back corner of the caf, an elderly man stood up. Mr. Walter Gray, a retired school principal and regular customer, raised his voice. "She's right," he said. "This young woman has more courage and integrity than anyone I've seen in years. And I, for one, am tired of watching you terrorize this cafe. Another customer stood. Then another. And another. One by one, the patrons began to speak up. She stood up for someone who was hurting. She said what we've all been too afraid to say. We're with her. Gregory turned, surrounded not by fear, but by a growing wave of defiance. His authority, once untouchable, was slipping through his fingers. With no words left, he grabbed his coat, pushed past Maya, and stormed out the door. The glass door shut behind him with a dull thud, but the cafe remained still, stunned by what had just occurred. Maya stood frozen, her heart racing. The next morning, Gregory returned. The staff tensed. Patrons fell silent again. But Gregory wasn't the same. He didn't yell. He didn't demand. He simply sat down and quietly ordered his usual espresso. And when Maya brought it to him, he looked up and, for the first time, said, "Thank you." Maya nodded, her voice calm. "You're welcome." Over the weeks that followed, something inside Gregory Langston began to change. He still came to the cafe. Still wore his expensive suits. But now he listened. Now he watched. He even asked about Noah's studies, or complimented Emily's service. It was subtle, but real. And it all began because one young woman, armed with nothing but courage and conviction, dared to say the one thing everyone else was too afraid to voice. No one gets to take our dignity away. The silence after Gregory Langston stormed out of the cafe was unlike anything anyone had ever experienced. It wasn't just relief, it was something deeper. The kind of silence that follows a storm, when the air feels different, and people begin to believe that change might actually be possible. Maya Carter stood still for a long moment, the aftershocks of what she had just done still reverberating through her. She had confronted one of the most feared men in the city, not out of anger, but out of principle. And even now, as whispers filled the cafe, she didn't regret it. But that didn't mean things were easy. As she returned to her duties, Maya could feel the tension still hanging in the air. Her co-workers avoided eye contact. Some looked at her with admiration. Others, with worry. And a few with thinly veiled resentment. Gregory Langston wasn't just a difficult customer, he was the cafe's most powerful patron. People feared the consequences of her defiance. Later that day, manager Thomas Reed quietly pulled Maya aside. His voice was kind, but hesitant. "I admire what you did, Maya," he said. "But Gregory has power beyond what most people know. He could close this cafe. He's done it before." Maya nodded. "I understand," she said. "But if no one ever stands up to people like him, when does it stop?" Thomas didn't have an answer. The next few days were heavy with uncertainty. Gregory didn't return, at least, not immediately. The cafe held its breath every time the door opened. The staff kept their heads low, fearful of fallout. But Maya worked as she always had, diligently, respectfully, quietly. She didn't seek attention. She just kept showing up. And then, 3 days later, Gregory came back. Everyone tensed. He wore the same pristine navy suit, the same cold expression. He walked to his usual table by the window, briefcase in hand. But this time, when Maya brought him his espresso, he looked at her, not with contempt, but with something closer to thoughtfulness. "Thank you," he said. It was just 2 words, but they landed in the room like thunder. Maya offered a quiet nod and turned away, but she could feel the shift in energy. Something was changing. Not just in Gregory, but in everyone. Over the following weeks, Gregory became a regular again, but not the same kind of regular. He no longer shouted, no longer threw cups, no longer humiliated staff. He watched Maya closely, not out of suspicion, but out of curiosity. He asked questions now. Listened more. Said please and thank you. It wasn't that he had transformed overnight. But a crack had formed in the wall he'd built around himself, and Maya's words had been the first to let light in. Other staff began to notice. Alex, the barista Maya had defended, started to regain his confidence. He began smiling again. Emily, the youngest waitress, said she felt safe for the first time since she started. Even Mr. Reed relaxed, his shoulders no longer tight with constant dread. But the real change came one crisp autumn morning. The cafe was quiet. Sunlight streamed in through the windows. Maya was wiping down a dashen table when Gregory approached, not to complain, not to criticize, but to speak. "Maya," he said, his voice unusually soft. "Can I ask you something?" She turned, unsure of what to expect. "How do you do it?" he asked. "How do you stay strong?" When people like me do everything they can to break you? Maya paused. Then she smiled gently. My mother, she said. She taught me that strength isn't about shouting louder than others. It's about knowing who you are, and never letting anyone take that away from you. Gregory was quiet for a long time. Then he nodded, slowly. That's something I never learned, he said. But I think I want to. From that day forward, Gregory Langston didn't just change his tone, he changed his actions. He donated anonymously to struggling cafes across the city. He started treating his employees with empathy. And every morning, he came to the same cafe, not because he needed coffee, but because he had found something there he couldn't find in boardrooms or penthouses. Human connection. And redemption. Maya never boasted about what she had done. She never needed to. Her strength didn't come from attention, it came from truth. And slowly, the rest of the city began to see what one brave voice could do. When Gregory Langston walked into the cafe that morning, he didn't expect anything to be different. He thought the silence, the fear, the anxious eyes, and bowed heads would remain the same as they always had. For years, his presence had been enough to freeze the room. A single frown could unravel a barista's confidence. A snapped command could silence a manager. To him, that was power. But something had shifted, and it all began with Maya Carter. He remembered her eyes. Steady. Unafraid. She had looked him in the face and called out his cruelty, not with rage, but with unshakable dignity. Gregory had built his world on fear, but she had met him with respect for herself, not submission. And that haunted him. What disturbed Gregory the most wasn't the confrontation, it was the clarity with which she had spoken. As if she had spent her whole life preparing to speak truth to someone like him. And perhaps she had. Born and raised on the rough edges of the South Side, Maya had watched her mother, Patricia, endure every kind of hardship, from racial bias to economic injustice, without ever losing her integrity. Her mother's words had become Maya's compass. They can take your job, your money, even your name. But never let them take your self-respect. So when she saw young Noah crumble under Gregory's wrath that morning, Maya knew. Silence would betray everything her mother had stood for. And though fear threatened to paralyze her, she chose to stand up. Now, days later, Gregory found himself returning to the cafe, not with the same swagger, but with a tension buried in his chest. He sat in his usual seat by the window, but this time, he didn't bark orders. He simply watched. Maya continued her work as if nothing had changed. Calm, efficient, kind. Not a single act was forced or theatrical. She treated the elderly customers with patience. She smiled at the nervous newcomers. She helped Noah restock when no one else noticed he was struggling. Gregory noticed it all. And it unnerved him. What struck him most was how unbothered Maya was by his presence. She wasn't afraid of him, not even now. That kind of quiet courage, unshaken by power, was foreign to him. All his life, Gregory had been taught that control came from dominance. That people respected you only when they feared you. But Maya's influence came from something else entirely. Something stronger. A week after the confrontation, Gregory did something no one expected. He apologized. He approached Noah first. Not with a booming voice or a lecture, but with something closer. To humility. I was wrong to speak to you that way, he said simply. You didn't deserve it. Noah, caught off guard, stammered a soft thank you, his face flushed with emotion. Then, Gregory turned to Maya. The entire cafe watched in stunned silence, as the man who once ruled the room with fear now stood in front of the young woman who had defied him. Maya, he began, I treated you unfairly. I said things no one should say, I'm sorry. Maya looked at him, not to judge, but to listen. I forgave you the moment you walked out. She replied gently. Not because you deserved it, but because I refused to carry your anger in my heart. Those words, simple as they were, pierced through Gregory's pride. For the first time, he realized that forgiveness wasn't weakness, it was power. And it was hers. From that day forward, Gregory changed, not for show, but for real. He still wore tailored suits. Still sipped espresso. But now he asked about the staff's families. He left generous tips. He even offered to fund the education of 2 part-time employees who dreamed of college. Maya didn't gloat. She didn't change the way she worked. But her quiet strength rippled outward. Customers returned to the cafe, not just for the coffee, but for the atmosphere, one that now held warmth instead of fear. Mr. Reed, the long-suffering manager, finally breathed easier. Noah laughed again. And Maya? She became a quiet legend, not because she fought fire with fire, but because she stood with calm conviction in the face of cruelty, and changed a man. No one believed could be changed. Even Gregory. One morning, as sunlight poured through the windows, he said something no one ever thought they'd hear from him. You know, Gregory said to Maya, I thought I had everything. But it turns out, I never even knew what real strength looked like, until I met you. Maya smiled softly, placing his coffee down. True strength is never loud, she replied. It just refuses to disappear. And with that, a new chapter opened, not just for Gregory and Maya, but for everyone who had ever believed that dignity, once spoken with courage, could echo louder than wealth or power ever could. The moment Gregory Langston walked out of the cafe in humiliation, the world inside those walls shifted. For the first time in years, the staff didn't flinch every time the door opened. Customers chatted again, laughter quietly returned, and the scent of fresh espresso no longer carried the stench of fear. But for Maya Carter, the young woman whose voice had sparked this change, the aftermath wasn't as easy as applause and relief. Though some smiled at her with quiet admiration, others kept their distance. Whispers filled the break room. She was brave, sure. But reckless. Doesn't she know who he is? Even her manager, Mr. Thomas Reed, had pulled her aside with worry lining his face. Maya, I understand why you did what you did. But Gregory Langston doesn't let things go. And yet, Maya did not regret a word. Raised by a single mother who cleaned offices by day and waitress by night, Maya had been taught that silence in the face of cruelty is a form of surrender. Her mother, Patricia Carter, often came home with blistered hands and tear-filled eyes, but she never once allowed her dignity to be broken. That quiet resilience had shaped Maya into a woman who, even in the face of someone like Gregory, could not bow. But Maya never expected what came next. Gregory Langston returned to the cafe every morning. At first, everyone held their breath. Was this retaliation? Was he planning something crueler? Would Maya be fired on the spot? But Gregory didn't come with insults. He came with silence. He ordered his espresso in a low voice. He didn't complain. He didn't scowl. Instead, he sat in his usual corner, watching especially Maya. And what he saw slowly unsettled him more than any confrontation could. He saw how she helped her coworkers without needing praise. How she smiled with sincerity. How she worked through the morning rush with grace, never flustered, never cold. She carried herself with a kind of quiet strength Gregory had never understood, a strength he could neither intimidate nor possess. It ate at him, not because he hated her, but because he hated how small she made him feel, without ever trying. In his penthouse, far above the city, Gregory stared at his reflection one night and didn't like what he saw. His wealth, his reputation, his years of dominance had never made him feel respected, only feared. And now, after years of crushing others to stay on top, one young woman had shaken his entire foundation. He thought of the things he'd said to her. The things he'd implied about her race, her background, her worth. He thought of how she'd stood there, not yelling, not breaking, just holding her ground with the quiet, righteous fire of someone who knows exactly who they are. The shame was unbearable. So the next morning, Gregory returned to the cafe, but this time, he didn't go to his seat. Instead, he walked directly to the counter, where Noah Bennett, the young barista Maya had defended, was preparing orders. The cafe fell into instant silence. May I speak with you, Noah? Gregory asked softly. Noah turned, his hands trembling. Yes, Mr. Langston. Gregory took a breath. I owe you an apology. I treated you horribly. I was wrong. And I'm sorry. Noah blinked, stunned. The entire cafe seemed to pause. Then, slowly, Noah smiled. Thank you, sir. I appreciate that. Gregory nodded and turned to Maya. She was standing near table 5, mid-service, her eyes meeting his with calm curiosity. He walked toward her, each step heavy, but certain. Miss Carter, he said, loud enough for everyone to hear, I came here today, not as a customer, but as a man who must make something right. I treated you with cruelty and disrespect. And yet, you met me with dignity I didn't deserve. For that, and for everything, I said I am deeply sorry. Maya looked at him for a long moment. Then she replied, voice steady and warm, Mr. Langston, I forgave you before you even knew you needed it. Gregory blinked. The words, so simple and sincere, hit him like a wave. Around them, the room stirred. Mr. Reed lowered his head, tears welling. Noah grinned, his heart finally at ease. Customers began to applaud softly at first, then rising into something powerful. Gregory nodded once more and sat at his usual table, not as a king, but as a man learning how to be human. From that day on, the café changed forever. Gregory still came every morning. But now he listened. He helped. He asked about the staff's lives. He greeted Maya with gratitude, not expectation. And Maya? She remained exactly as she was, steady, kind, and unapologetically strong. She didn't need to be louder. Her silence had already spoken volumes. From the moment Maya Carter stood her ground in that quiet cafe, something powerful began to ripple, not just through the people around her, but through the man she had confronted. Gregory Langston, once the most feared name in that corner of the city, had been publicly challenged by a young black woman half his age, with no wealth, no titles, just an unshakable sense of self-respect. And somehow, she had changed him. In the days that followed his unexpected apology, a strange peace settled into the cafe. The tension that once hung in the air like static had faded. The clatter of cups no longer came with trembling hands. Laughter returned, softly at first, then stronger. Even the espresso machine seemed to hum with more joy. Gregory still came every morning. But he was different. He spoke with softness. He listened. And though he still wore designer suits and held a commanding presence, the ice in his voice had thawed. Most telling of all, he always asked for Maya to bring his coffee. Not as a show of dominance, but as an unspoken gesture of respect. What Gregory never expected, however, was how much Maya would continue to shape him, without even trying. Every day, he watched her serve the customers with grace and intention. He noticed how she always greeted elderly patrons by name, how she helped Noah fix the jammed register without complaint, how she stayed late to clean so her coworkers with evening classes could leave early. Her strength wasn't loud, it was lived. And slowly, Gregory began to understand something he'd never fully grasped in all his years of building empires. True power doesn't come from making people fear you. It comes from making people feel seen. One crisp autumn afternoon, Gregory lingered after the morning rush. Maya was wiping down tables near the window when he cleared his throat and approached her. "May I ask you something?" he said, his voice unusually tentative. Maya looked up. "Of course, Mr. Langston." He hesitated. "How are you?" "So strong." The question hung in the air. Maya placed the cloth down, met his eyes, and said gently, "Because I had to be. I grew up watching my mother walk through fire and never burn. We didn't have much, but she always told me, dignity isn't for sale. And once you give it away, you'll spend your life trying to get it back." Gregory was silent, but the words burrowed deep. That night, he sat alone in his penthouse, untouched whiskey on the table beside him. His phone buzzed with messages from executives, lawyers, and board members, but none of it mattered. All he could think about was Maya's quiet strength, her mother's words, and the place, the cruel, aching truth that despite all he owned, he had never felt as full as he did in those brief conversations with her. Over the next few weeks, his behavior began to shift in ways even he didn't fully understand. He called his executive assistant and apologized for years of coldness. He reached out to 3 former employees he'd once fired in anger and offered them mentorship or support. He donated anonymously to the community center near the cafe, after overhearing Maya mention they needed books for underfunded students. But perhaps most telling of all, one morning he entered the cafe and stood before the entire staff as they were prepping for the day. "I want to say something," he said, clearing his throat. Everyone froze. "I was a different man when I first walked into this place. I thought power meant getting what I wanted, no matter the cost. But one person reminded me that real strength is quiet. It's patient. It lifts others up. And I want you all to know. I see that now." He turned to Maya, who stood quietly, unsure of how to respond. "I may never deserve your forgiveness," he said, "but I will spend every day trying to live as someone who learned from your courage." Maya nodded, her eyes shining. "You already are." From that day forward, Gregory Langston was no longer the name people whispered in fear. He became a symbol of something else entirely, proof that change is possible, even for those the world believes are beyond redemption. And Maya Carter? She remained the same. Steady. Compassionate. Unshakable. But now, those around her walked taller too. Because when one person dares to stand with dignity, it gives others permission to rise as well. Her story spread beyond the cafe, first among customers, then across the neighborhood. Local journalists began asking about the young woman who changed the city's most ruthless businessman with nothing but truth and grace. But Maya always gave the same answer. I didn't do anything extraordinary, I just remembered who I was. And refused to forget it, even when someone else tried to make me. It began with a confrontation, but it ended with a transformation. In the weeks and months after that unforgettable morning, the relationship between Gregory Langston and Maya Carter evolved into something no one could have predicted. What started as an explosive clash between power and principle gradually softened into a quiet, profound bond built, not on status or obligation, but on mutual respect and deep human understanding. Gregory, once a man who lived for control and feared vulnerability, had started to shed the armor he wore for decades. He still dressed in tailored suits, still carried the air of a man who had built empires. But something within him had changed. His eyes held more thought, his voice more warmth. And the person who unlocked that change wasn't a CEO or therapist. It was a young caf server who dared to see him not as untouchable, but as someone accountable. Each morning, Gregory would come in not for caffeine, but for connection. His daily espresso, once a symbol of his perfectionist wrath, had become a ritual of humility. And Maya? She served him without fear or fanfare, always with the same calm kindness. She had never wanted attention, never sought recognition, but she had become something bigger than herself. She had become a symbol of courage. Word spread quickly through the city, not of a scandal or a corporate downfall, but of a quiet revolution sparked by dignity. Customers who had once lowered their eyes when Gregory entered now smiled and greeted him. New patrons came, hoping to meet the young woman who changed the lion. Local journalists wrote stories. Schools invited Maya to speak about strength and respect. A mural of her was painted on the side of a community center, captioned with her mother's words, "Dignity isn't for sale." Maya's image became one of hope, not because she shouted, but because she stood. Not because she fought, but because she refused to be moved. But the most remarkable shift remained in Gregory himself. He had once believed that strength meant domination. That power meant getting your way. But now, he saw a different kind of strength, one found in compassion, in listening, in letting go of pride. And each day he watched Maya work, wiping tables, calming customers, helping coworkers. He realized he had much more to learn from her than from any boardroom negotiation. One afternoon, he waited until the cafe emptied and asked Maya if he could speak with her. Outside, the autumn air was cool, the sidewalk quiet under falling leaves. "Maya," he said softly, "do you ever wonder why I keep coming here?" She smiled gently. "You already told me once, it's not about the coffee anymore." He chuckled, then turned serious. "You've changed me. More than I thought was possible. And it frightens me how long I lived without knowing what respect really meant. You didn't just teach me, you showed me. And I'll spend the rest of my life trying to live by that." Maya didn't reply right away. Then she said, "People don't change because they're forced to. They change when they finally feel safe enough to see the truth." Gregory nodded, eyes glistening. "You made me feel that." In the days that followed, Gregory began quietly funding community initiatives, youth education programs, mental health resources for service workers, and a mentorship program for young entrepreneurs from underrepresented backgrounds. He never asked for credit. He didn't want his name on buildings or plaques. He simply wanted to give back, because that's what Maya had taught him. Not with lessons, but with presence. Maya, meanwhile, continued her work with the same grace as always. But now, she was more than a barista. She was a mentor, a role model, a quiet leader in her community. Young girls looked up to her, women from all walks of life found inspiration in her story, and even though Café itself transformed into a place of healing, where everyone regardless of color, income, or title was treated with respect. One early morning, as the city woke slowly under a pink sunrise, Gregory walked into the pagan sunrise. Caf paused at the counter and said something that silenced the room. "I'm not here as Gregory Langston today. I'm here as a man who was changed, because someone had the courage to speak when no one else would." He turned to Maya. "You reminded me who I could be. And I hope you know, this place, this team, this community, we're all better because of you." Maya smiled, eyes full of quiet gratitude. She didn't need applause. She had already won the Greatest victory of all. Reminding others of their shared humanity. And as the cafe buzzed with warmth and light, two very different people, one once feared, the other once underestimated, stood together, side by side. Proof that real change doesn't begin in boardrooms or on podiums. It begins when someone like Maya Carter dares to say, "We all deserve respect." And someone like Gregory Langston finally chooses to listen. From the moment Maya Carter spoke up in that tense, silent cafe, something irreversible began to unfold, not just in the heart of Gregory Langston, the once feared millionaire, but in every person who witnessed her act of courage. Maya didn't raise her voice. She didn't demand attention. She simply told the truth, with unwavering calm and self-respect. Her words pierced through years of dominance and arrogance, challenging the very foundation of love, Gregory's identity. And slowly, remarkably, it worked. Gregory returned again and again, not to retaliate, but to understand. And over time, he transformed. No longer the tyrant, he became a man humbled by the dignity of someone society might have overlooked. Maya, in turn, never let the spotlight change her. She continued to serve coffee, clean tables, and treat every person as an equal. But now, she wasn't just a server. She was a quiet symbol of strength, a living reminder that even the most powerful can be changed by truth, spoken with grace. True strength is not about how loud you speak, it's about how deeply your truth is rooted. Maya didn't fight with anger. She fought with dignity. And because of that, she didn't just win an argument, she awakened a heart. Has anyone ever underestimated you, and you proved them wrong with quiet strength? Share your story in the comments, we'd love to hear it. If this story touched your heart, please like the video, subscribe for more powerful real-life stories, and don't forget to hit the bell, so you never miss a reminder of how dignity can change the world.